After Khomeini betrayed the Iranian people, hijacked their revolution and brought to power a bloodthirsty fundamental state, he said from the very beginning, "We want a caliph to cut off hands, punish, and stone to death. Some people are never corrected unless they are amputated and burned. For the others, kill them, beat them, and throw them behind bars. They must be seriously prosecuted and dealt with. Whenever it is determined that the individual is to be punished, then he should be punished." The report card of this fundamentalist regime is full of blood, and measures such as amputations, rape in torture chambers, hangings and firing squads, executions on the spot, floggings, gouging out eyes, and other shocking rulings such as throwing people off cliffs and stonings were all carried out across the country under Khomeini fatwas. They were then spread abroad under the pretext of exporting the revolution. Khomeini also issued fatwas to literally remove the blood of death row prisoners before execution, raping young women the night before being hanged, and permitting the murder of PMOI members and other regime dissidents. His followers carried out his orders step by step in efforts to maintain their disgraceful rule. In 1981, Rafsanjani, then Speaker of the Iranian regime's parliament, said in a speech that 4 rulings are binding for PMOI members: be killed, hanged, hands and feet amputated, and separated from the society. In September of 1981, Mohammadi Gilani, then head of Khomeini's so-called Supreme Court, said in a sermon on the PMOI and those who cooperate with them, "They should be killed in the harshest manner, hanged in the most atrocious way possible, and their right hand and left foot should be amputated. Shoot them to death on the spot. According to religious principles, it is not necessary to bring them to a competent court. Even if they lose their lives while being punished under torture, Islam allows it, and no one should be held accountable." This is exactly what Imam's fatwa says. The Iranian resistance had warned years before about the threat of fundamentalism.
خطر روزافزون مداخلات و توطئه‌ها و تروریسم رژیم ملایان در عراق اکنون 100 بار از خطر اتمی این رژیم بیشتر است.
There's an alternative in Iran that stands for democracy, stands for freedom, stands for human rights, stands for the rights of a woman, is led by a woman, and that is, of course, the MEK and Madam Rajavi. It is my honor to present to you Madam Rajavi.
رژیم رکورددار جهانی اعدام و بانکدار مرکزی تروریسم باید سرنگون شود. این حکم تاریخ است. این حکم تاریخ است. این حکم 120,000 شهید راه آزادی و این فریاد اجتماع بزرگ امروز ماست که فاشیسم دینی باید سرنگون شود.
It is good to know that where there is so much darkness, there is also light and there is hope, and we certainly have that in Madam Rajavi. I'd like to introduce next to you again someone who is a great friend to the Iranian American community, and who has stood very steadfast in your cause. He is General Hugh Shelton, who became the 14th chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He has been decorated as for his distinguished service. He is also, perhaps I should call you Sir Hugh. He has been knighted by Queen Elizabeth II, and for the exemplary service to his country, Congress bestowed on him the Congressional Gold Medal in September 2002, and currently he is the Executive Director of the General Hugh Shelton Leadership Center at North Carolina State University and Director of the Hugh and Carolyn Shelton Military Neurotrauma Foundation. General Shelton.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Linda, for your very kind remarks, and thanks to each of you for that very warm welcome. It is really great to be with you here in Phoenix, and let me say right from the outset how much I appreciate and thank the Iranian American community of Arizona for organizing this very timely conference. I'm also honored to be on the dais today with such a distinguished group of individuals. In particular, if I might single one out, the man that I've traveled around the globe with, trying to bring attention to the cause of the MEK that are trapped in Iraq, Mayor Rudy Giuliani. But it's a pleasure to be with each and every one of you. And to our very good friends and close friends in Camp Liberty, Salam Alaikum. Last Tuesday, the crisis in the Middle East was once again shockingly striking a note that was close to home when Kayla Mueller's family confirmed that this 26-year-old aid worker had been killed in Syria approximately 1 year and 7 months after she had been taken captive by the Islamic State, otherwise called today ISIS, and had been killed because she was trying to help refugees escape that war-torn country. An individual trying to make the world a better place, viciously executed. First of all, I would say, as the Attorney General has said, my heart goes out to her family and friends, and really to all of you in the larger family here in the great state of Arizona. Sadly, she is not the first American civilian to be killed while in the clutches of this brutal terrorist group. And I fear, and I'm not a Republican or Democrat, I'm an independent, and I believe in supporting whoever and whatever is best for this great nation as I see it. But I fear, as long as the Obama administration's current weak-will policy persists, that she is not going to be the last. When Americans start dying and foreign nationals are routinely brutalized, the time for leading from behind should be over. Now, no one, not anyone in this room, I'm sure, at least of all myself, wants to see the U.S. mired in another Middle Eastern war. I mean, after 10 years so far in Afghanistan, and actually 12 years now, and 10 years in Iraq before we pulled out, or cut and ran, as I usually say. As an officer who served in the military for 38 years, who knows the horrors of war, I am well aware of what the potential costs are in terms of lives, in terms of brutal injuries to our men and women in uniform, in terms of our national resources, over $1 trillion spent in Iraq already. I'm well aware of what the cost is. However, in some cases, you have to pay the cost in order to make sure that in the final analysis, you win, that you stand for what's right, and you fight for what's right. Now, I'm not advocating for more boots on the ground today. At least someone mistake what I said for saying let's run out and put in 500,000 and make short work of it. I really don't believe that. I only know that it is absolutely essential for America's interests in the Middle East, the stability of the Middle East, and for the human lives across the globe, what the price will be if we do nothing. And unfortunately, that's about all that we have done so far that means anything, is nothing. Our strategy, which spells out the force levels and spells out concerns about the time, is a recipe for disaster and for losing if there's ever been one. You don't reveal your strategy to the enemy, and certainly you don't tell them what your force levels are going to be, and you don't tell them what the time constraints that you're working under is. I feel confident that wasn't the military advice that the president was given, but I wasn't there, so I can't swear to that. But the fact is that President Obama's policy is going to make the crisis worse, not just in Syria, not just in the Middle East, but actually across the globe. The conflict has reached far and wide already. It's killing people like Ms. Mueller. It's radicalizing Muslim youth in the Western countries and democracies. And it's leading to incidents like we saw in the newspaper facility or in the offices of Charlie Hebdo in Paris. The U.S. has not done enough to halt this proliferation of violence in any way, shape, or form. And in essence, what we have done thus far, we have failed to confront ISIS directly, and instead we've adopted a policy of cooperating with the Islamic Republic of Iran, thereby, in essence, legitimizing the extremism and providing ISIS and other Sunni terrorists with a healthy source of recruitment and motivation. And that is tragic. I see enough gray hair in this room, or in some cases, like myself, the lack of hair, that I know that all of you remember what day before yesterday was, right? February the 11th. It marked the 36th anniversary of the Islamic Revolution in Iran. It seems to me as if it were yesterday. But the sparse turnout in Iran to mark that celebration clearly demonstrated a deficit of the legitimacy and the popular base support for the ruling theocracy, and clearly indicated that the overwhelming majority of Iranians desire to change this medieval theocracy. The support for them is not there. And although ISIS has thoroughly dominated the headlines coming directly out of the Middle East in recent months, as we've all seen, this occasion provided a very useful opportunity to remind the world that Tehran is essentially the modern prototype of fundamentalist Islam, a perverted version of the great religion, of course predating ISIS, predating Al-Qaeda, and being responsible for the first major confrontation between the Islamic fundamentalism and the West during the 1979 Iran hostage crisis. The Obama administration's acknowledgement of the Iranian regime's role as a successful regional power neglects the essential nature of this conflict that the U.S. is effectively evading in the Middle East. It is not merely a conflict with ISIS. It is a conflict of ideology. It is the group that captured Kayla Mueller has risen up. If they hadn't risen up against the Shiite power grab or in Nouri Malik's Iraq, some other collective of Sunni extremists probably would have done so, because the problem at the moment may be ISIS, but the problem in general throughout the Middle East is Islamic extremism, and Iran embodies that. The facts should be rather obvious, but the current administration appears to be blind to every aspect of Iran's behavior and their impact on global stability that doesn't directly affect the nuclear negotiations or the short-term combat with ISIS. And yet, lawmakers from both parties, and in particular the esteemed chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Senator John McCain, they are well aware of Iran's past double dealing on the nuclear issue, and they are very rightly concerned that the Islamic Republic's unwillingness to compromise on the forthcoming deal signals that we're just going to get more of the same out of Iran. Likewise, Iran's critics in the U.S. Congress and foreign policy circles have not forgotten that Iran is consistently listed as the leading exporter of terrorism in the world. And it's particularly true for Islamic terrorism in forms such as Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and the Shia militias that were responsible for the deaths of thousands of U.S. servicemen and women in Iraq. Militias that are again running rampant in Iraq as the U.S. deliberately allows Iran to go on sponsoring, reinforcing, and directly leading those forces. Last count I saw, Iran had over 7,000 of their Quds forces and the IRGC, their best troops, in Iraq as we speak, advising, directing, and leading their forces. Iraqi Kurds have described those militias as being responsible for human rights violations as bad or worse than those that have been perpetrated by ISIS. This points to the obvious conclusion that Iran's transformation into a successful regional power will not save the lives of others like Kayla Mueller. It will only put those lives at risk from the Shia extremists instead of Sunni extremists. The current policy of the United States is clearly to promote one brand of extremism to replace another brand. The correct policy for the United States to follow would be to confront extremism in all of its forms. Some may feel anxious that this would seem like that I was advocating for an endless war in the Middle East on multiple fronts. But I can assure you and any other American that wants to listen that that's not the case. Such drastic measures would only be necessary if you assume that the Middle East was populated solely by extremist groups. But that's not the case. Rather, when you look at Iraq, Syria, Iran, and all other countries in the region, they're homes to a lot of very moderate Muslim groups. For example, the Free Syrian Army and the MEK, to name a couple. The MEK is too often neglected, although they are fighting on a daily basis, as we see here. They are paying the price because they are fighting for democratic rule and a more tolerant version of their faith. They're fighting for government that promotes gender equality, universal suffrage, religious tolerance, and a non-nuclear Iran. Does that sound like something that the United States itself would like to achieve? I think so. Its leader, Madam Rajavi, as was pointed out just a few minutes ago, has been an inspiration to the Iranian people, in particular to the Iranian women and the youth, and their struggle against the ruthless mullahs, because she offers a forward-looking, democratic, and modern future for Iran. She offers what the Iranians in the country aspire to. And the issue being right now is that those are the Iranians that don't have the gun, and that's why they need all the support that we can possibly give them in every way, shape, and form. And yet, sadly, our policy has been to ignore these moderate forces. The U.S. failure vis-a-vis the MEK and the 3,000 members trapped inside of Iraq has been particularly glaring. You know, our military, and we feel particularly bad about it, those of us that have worn the uniform of our nation, and our government, specifically our State Department, gave a written guarantee to protect every one of those citizens, every MEK citizen that's still trapped in Iraq. Yet since we handed over their protection to the Iraqi government, more than 100 have been brutally murdered. And I mean murdered by having their hands tied behind their back and shot in the back of the head or shot through the face. It was done by Shia militia acting on behest of Iran. And at first step, you know, our government must do something everything in its power to protect the citizens in Camp Liberty, to show faith, and to get them out of these terrible conditions. Some call it a prison camp. I would call it more akin, as I think I've heard Mayor Giuliani refer to it, as a concentration camp. But I would tell you that the conditions they live under day in and day out would make something that Sheriff Joe here in Arizona, who runs a pretty tight prison, I'm told, a pretty tight jail, it would make his place look like a Ritz-Carlton. The correct policy for the United States is to support these groups in lieu of choosing another among equally monstrous established powers such as Iran that can only further destabilize the region and lead to more deaths, not only among Middle Easterners, but also among Westerners as well, like Kayla Mueller. To partner with Iran in the fight against ISIS is like asking the arsonist to help put out the fire. This would be a recipe for disaster in every way, shape, and form. ISIS is a plague, and it must be uprooted, and it must be stamped out. We must stamp out ISIS from the face of the earth. But to do so, we must eliminate the root cause of fundamentalist Islam, namely the regime in Tehran, which has acted as the central banker of terrorism and the ideological, the financial, political, and military background for extremism in the region for the past 35 years. Iran today plays the same role in the Middle East, I believe, or would like to play the same role that Russia played in the Soviet Union. In closing, I want to tell our friends at Camp Liberty that we stand with you. Not a day goes by that I personally do not pray for your welfare and safe being. And I would also add that I would ask the United States to at least consider arming the residents at Camp Liberty. In America, we have a thing called the Second Amendment, and it is something that is guaranteed to our citizens. I guarantee you these are fighters, and if faced with the choice of having their hands tied behind their back and shot through they'll come out fighting, but they've got to have something to fight with. So we ought to insist with the Iraqi government that these individuals be armed. They are making daily sacrifices, enormous sacrifices, and basically to make sure that they can fight to see Iran, one of these days, torn from the clutches of the mullahs. And I hope that we all can join together, along with the residents of Camp Liberty, in a free and democratic Iran. And with your continued support, and with the will and strong support of those still at Camp Liberty, and the enormous support from President-elect Rajavi, I am confident that one day, very soon, that will come true. Thank you, and may God bless. Thank you.